Hello and welcome to a new video. So today we're going to be talking about the state of the meta, what changes have happened, and where I think that most of these armies fall under. Now, first things first, these are of course just my opinions, and we're going to see in time if, my opinions were correct. So let's talk about the top of the food chain at our current meta before the balance update, which of course was Chaos Space Marines and Eldar. So, what happened? So, let's see. Eldar got a series, quite a number of nerfs. Now, this is, for everyone who's paying attention, number 4 from their nerfs. So, they got 4 nerfs that they went through, and hopefully they, get back down to that 55, and below percent win percentage so that they can stop getting nerfed, because it is kind of boring and I'm just over it. Like, they should have been nerfed harder in the first 2 nerfs. They didn't necessarily need that 3rd nerf, and now we've got a 4th nerf. So hopefully this is the last one, but let's cover all the changes. So first things first, they got some points increases. Night Spinners went up in points. Actually, anything indirect in the entire game went up in points, except for any vehicles with indirect went up. So they went up 30 points. Not crazy. Your Wraith Guard went up as well. They got a number of nerfs. So let's talk about both the Night Spinner and the Wraith Guard. So Night Spinner, like I said, went up 30 points. It also now ability is more in line where it modifies the move and the advance characteristics by 2. So that's much better than, hey, you just can't advance. So that's good. A good needed change to the game. I still feel like Night Spinners definitely needed more of a stern touch there. I think they needed to go to not having devastating on the profile anymore, or not having twin linked on the profile. But hey, this is where we're at. Nothing really we can do about it, right? So we've got that going on. And then with Wraith Guard, they went up some points, like I said. Also now they can only fire at what fired at them once per game. So no more of this, a unit from across the map fires at you, and then you fire at something very close before it gets to fire at you. And the reasoning, I think, behind why they did this, and they did the same thing with the Yinkarn, which we're going to talk about as well, is because I think a lot of players have voiced their frustrations about having to dictate their turn around Eldar. Like, the game in the current state, before we get the balance update, is mostly like Eldar's game, right? I have Phantasm, I get to move when I feel like it, I can move around you, so all of your plans might end up being for naught. We've got that going on. We have, Fire and Fade, so again, I move up, I shoot you, I disappear, or maybe I push even further. We've got the teleporting Yinkarn, which creates a whole scenario of problems, because anytime something dies, you basically get to teleport right now as it stands. Once per phase, but still, that is very powerful, and it dictates a lot of the play, because what happens is, even on your turn, I need to figure out what units I need to shoot. I need to figure out when I'm going to shoot those units, and maybe not shoot them at all, because maybe if I shoot them, I can't charge what I want to charge, because now I'm going to have a Yinkarn, basically teleporting, and maybe I want to kill the Yinkarn this turn. So that dictates a lot of the play already. And like I said, same with the Wraith Guard, right? Because the Wraith Guard have Phantasm they can move, they've got Fire and Fade they can move, they have bodyguards, bodyguard regenerating, so they'll bring back you'll bring back a model from the unit every time. They've got Fate's Messenger, which is something that affected basically unit, not the character, which we're going to talk about the change. But all of these things, and shooting out of phase, like I said, they shoot on your turn. They also have Overwatch capabilities. So technically that unit can shoot, 3 times in one battle round, right? It shoots at your turn, then it shoots in Overwatch, either in the moving phase or the shooting phase, and then it shoots again in the shooting phase as though it were the shooting phase. So, 3 times in a game is just a lot. And like I said, it creates this difficulty where their opponent is like, man, can't shoot that unit or it shoots back at me, you know? So like there's no softening it up. Unless you're going to kill it in one shot or kill enough of it where it doesn't matter, allowing them to shoot at you because you fired like a rhino or some bolters to maybe put one of the ones that was wounded on the last wound, it's just not worth it. Then, like I said, again, you have the quality of the, you have the issue with the yin card teleporting as well. So all of these things I think that people were upset about. I think Games Workshop's like, you know what? Let's make it so players whose turn it's not don't dictate the entire game. So that was a good change for Wraithguard. And of course, they can only fire at 18 inches. So that's another change that, like, so if you're at 18.1 and further, they're just not going to be able to do anything to you when you shoot at them. So that's really good change. And then let's talk about basically some of the enhancements. So I said, before that they had the enhancement where they could basically turn dice in Wraithguard. Well, now that only affects the bearer. So that's a big deal because before, a Spirit Seer's just sitting there and basically just Fate's Messenger, and turn a die into a 6. And that was a problem because they were devastating or it was lethal, depending on what you needed for that particular instance. And it would be a problem, right? So now you're going to see that on like a Death Jester or something like that, but you're not going to see it on a Spirit Seer, and you're probably not going to see Wraithguard because them going up in points and losing all these changes probably fixes them as well. So they have that going on. Now we go to the Yin Karn. So the Yin Karn's got a big change where basically she doesn't teleport anymore on your opponent's turn. She can only teleport on the Eldar player's turn. And that's, again, a big deal because, like I said, a lot of the time you had to dictate your turn where you're like, all right, cool. So I'm actually not going to shoot them this turn because, or I'm not going to shoot this unit. Maybe I have to charge it because I want to kill the Yin Karn. So now I have to like revolve my whole plan around one of your models. And then if I fail to kill it or, I shoot something, I think I'm going to soften enough and I kill it, the Yin Karn just teleports and now I can't kill her. So that's great change. I like that change a lot. So we got Fate Messenger. We've got the Yin Karn change, we've got the Night Spinner change, and then lastly, we've got, of course, the Fate dice change. So instead of starting with, 12 and then being able to mulligan and things like that, you're only going to start with 6 now unless you take a special character, which Eldorad, so that'll give you another 3 Fate dice. But if not, you're just going to start with 6. So that has a lot of effects, basically. That means instead of you being able to use them 2 every battle round, right, like, I get to use it on your turn, and I'm going to use it on my turn. Now, of course, you can use it on different phases, but the gist of it is I could use, if I get 12, I could use it every turn, and then twice a battle round, basically, if you wanted to use all 12 the entire game. And probably the end of the game, you don't really need to use it. So, like, turn 5, you can probably just have 1 dice, and then you have another way to stack up. And if you don't need to use it in your opponent's turn, like turn 1, well, then you just don't care. Right? So that's less dice you're saving. Now with 6, you're really going to have to be strategic in how you use these dice. Also, mulliganing is basically like a thing of the past. You're just not going to do it because you don't have the, the extra dice to basically utilize it. Will you maybe see that character now? Yeah, you might see extra dice being utilized, right? So that is Eldar. So where do they sit after all this? They got knocked pretty substantially. I mean, they were basically S tier with CSM, so I think that brings them down to low A tier or the top of the B tier. Are people still going to win GTs with them? Yes. Are they still going to be a problem? Definitely. There is a lot of that book that has just not been explored. Harlequins haven't been explored. They can be used in Eldar. You've got, Ynnari can be used in conjunction with Eldar. And there's just a whole bunch of units that just stopped seeing play because the better option was just 10 Wraithguard. So we'll see what happens with them. I'm going to put them in the A tier. I'm going to say they go to the A tier. And then we've got CSM, right? They were the boogeymen of this past meta. So the reason being is because they beat just about everybody, right? They ended up with like a 64% win ratio. And the build was just obnoxious to play. Like 60 Accursed Cultists, 3 units of Chosen inside of a Rhino, some Forge Fiend for outflanking and long-range shooting because one stayed on the table with the Nurgle strat. And then we had one that used to come on the table with full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound with Devastating. It was just a very frustrating army to play. They played secondaries extremely well. You basically play Cleanse, deploy Teleport Homers, just without even thinking. And then, when these guys got out of the transport, they had Advance and Charge for free. They had a free strat, which was like full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound in combat, or Armor of Contempt that they need to keep alive. And then the character inside of it, the one who gave them the free strats, basically has a hammer that causes devastating, which is just a lot of damage, especially with full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound, right? So let's talk about what changed with them. So first things first, we have basically the demonic allies. So what that change did was it basically forced you to take battle line units for every non-battle line unit you take. So what does that really mean? That means if you want to take a character, HQ, a monster, anything from demons, then you will have to then buy a battle line unit. So for Nurgle, it's easy because you get Nurglings or Plague Bearers, which is actually pretty nice because they're sticky as well. But for like Tzeentch, if you want to take like the Changeling or Blue Scribes, you're forced to take like Pink Horrors. And that's just really not something you want to do. They don't really give you utility in the CSM list. Now in other lists like T-Suns, they're pretty good for support for just hanging out, but in CSM you have better options. Same thing with Demonettes. If you want to take like Celeste, you have to take now Demonettes, which again, they don't have the same utility that like your Warp Talons or just a unit. Even like a normal unit of Legionnaires does more damage than Demonettes. So, and then lastly for Khorne, if you want to take like Blood Crushers, because you heard they're really, really good now, you're going to have to take a squad of Letters. So these are basically taxes, except for Nurgle, because you were just going to take Nurglings, and that's fine anyway. So that's the first nerf. And that's a pretty substantial nerf, because a lot of lists were like being different by taking Changelings, Blue Scribes, and Celeste. But you won't see any of those anymore. So first change first, in the actual Space Marine category is basically that the Nurgle strat went from 12 inches untargetable to now 18 inches. So you have to be over 18 inches now to be untargetable with that Nurgle strat. It was previously, if you were 12.1, you couldn't shoot them. That's a big change. Not as big as the other change, which actually I think was written on top of this one, which is whatever your transport is, whatever allegiance that it owes to whichever god it has, so Nurgle, Khorne, Undivided, only units of that mark can go inside that transport. Now that is a big deal, because before you could get the Nurgle, Rhino, and then you got the guys inside, which were Undivided. So that gave you basically the best of both worlds, because you got the Nurgle strat plus Smoke Screen on 2 out of the 3 your Rhinos, which mostly kept those things alive, and that was awesome. And then when the guys got out, they were Undivided. So they had the strat access for full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound in combat, Advance and Charge, all the crazy stuff. Unfortunately now, they're going to have to pick. And I believe, because I think this army's still good, that you will definitely see them probably just as Undivided at this point. Because, yeah, Undivided still gives you some very good bonuses. And you're still in a Rhino, so it's not like they just pop the Rhino immediately. It just makes it easier to kill now. So that is a pretty big change that definitely changes the way the army plays. Next, you had the full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound strat. Now goes to just full rerolls to wound. That's a big deal, but not really as big as a lot of people are saying. The reason why it isn't is because Abaddon can just be taken, and he solves that issue immediately, right? So his aura, one of the ones he can pick, is he basically has full rerolls to hit. So full rerolls to hit is literally the same as full rerolls to hit, full rerolls to wound. Now, is it going to be more difficult to do? Yes. Is it going to be easier to achieve if you take like things like Obliterators and you kind of walk Abaddon up as like a ball of death? Yeah, 100%. Is Abaddon still a beast in combat? 100%. So I think that a lot of people kind of like, oh man, this is the great, it's going to completely stop this. I don't really think it did that much. And like, honestly, Abaddon is still super good. He didn't get a points increase. Like, he's just a monster. So these are the big changes that we saw from them. And then lastly, of course, is the double Accursed Cultist nerf. Curse Cultist going down to OC1, and then the healing instead of every command phase, just your command phase. Is that enough to take them off your list? Oh, and of course they got a points increase. Only 20 points for a 16 unit, so not too crazy. But and then 10 points for the Dark Commune, so 30 points is what you're netting for negative. You're negative 30. But is that enough to take them off the table? I don't think so. So now we look at points increases. The Lord in that Squad of Chosen went up 20 points, as did the Chosen, and your Forge Fiend went up 20 points. Obliterators went up 10 points, and Warp Talons went up 10 points. So where does this army sit? Somewhere in the A tier, 100%. I don't think this army really lost like almost anything, and I think a lot of people are very quick to judge and say that this army like took a major hit. At best, this army sits at the top of the... Sorry, at worst, this army sits at the top of the B tier, and it probably sits maybe on the lower side of the A tier, but still one of those top 6 armies, 100%. So that is the 2 big boys that were at the top of the meta at the end. So let us quickly go through some of these other armies. So Orcs got some substantial nerfs, nothing too crazy, just some points increases, which was basically just... the trucks went up in points. The Squig Hog Riders went up in points. But, nothing too crazy. Where are they going to sit? In the A tier, 100%. Their natural enemy was basically CSM, was a problem for them, and Eldar was a problem. Eldar getting a substantial nerf definitely makes that more difficult for Eldar to play. Now, do Eldar still truck the faces off of Orcs? They definitely can, especially if Eldar go first, and especially if they move to the triple spinner build. You move to triple spinner, Orcs are going to have a problem. Yeah, they don't get the, you're not stopping them in their tracks for advance and charge, but 2 turns of hammering their vehicles is definitely going to make it difficult. Not to mention, you still have the Incarn, you still have tons of other shooting, Warp Spiders still do a ton of damage to them, Shadow Specters are still really good. You've got some of the best characters in the game, the Autarch that gets back up, hits pretty hard, so does Fugan. So, yeah, I think Orcs are still going to be at that A tier. I'm not really going to put anything in the S tier. I don't know anything that goes in the S tier right now. I don't have the data, but they definitely are at the top of the A tier, 100%. So one of the top 6 armies, Next, we got Votann, another army that I think they got some slight changes. I think their army went up like 150 points, but they were just so cheap. I mean, their Sagittars went up, their troops went up, their Terminators went up, and the bikes went up. But very small stuff. So ultimately, where does it put these guys? Well, they didn't really lose that much. Most of the list lost 2 squads of infantry, which they weren't really doing anything other than screening and doing secondaries. So you're still going to see like 6 Sagittar or 5 Sagittar. You're still going to see Zerkers. You're still going to see bikes. And you're still going to see Terminators. You might not see the 5-man anymore, but you're definitely going to see a 10-man. So I also put them at the top of the A tier. So now we've got at the top, I'm thinking it's going to be Orcs, Votann, most definitely. So let's talk about a couple of the other outliers. Tau got almost no changes, right? Like, yeah, the suits went up 20 points, but the characters went down 10 points. So your army went up like, I don't know, you took 3 squads of those, so maybe they went up, like 40 points. If you took double 6-man, they went up 50 points. 50 points is really nothing crazy there. You lose like 1 strike squad, and you're fine. So they're definitely going to be powerful because, again, another army they lost to is Eldar, and now Eldar are significantly nerfed. Before, Eldar completely shut Tau down, right? You hit them with the Night Spinner, the suits couldn't advance, which is their whole shtick. So if they can't do that, they're just, stuck. Now they just get -2 to that, so they're completely fine. They can use all their tricks, and that is going to be good for Tau players. So definitely in the top of the A tier as well. Then we've got some other armies that I think are doing well, but not amazing. Guard basically are going to be somewhere at, I think, the top of B tier. Their Manticores went up, which is really nothing crazy. So now you're going to take Manticores, right? You're not taking them. So they definitely lost about a squad of infantry. But ultimately the army is still exactly where it is. So lots of artillery fire, lots of units doing actions. They've got lots of scout moves. So that army is going to be completely fine. So that's good for them. I would put them somewhere at the top of B. I don't really think there's a lot of armies that are like below C tier. I don't know any armies that are like, oh man, this is really bad for them, right? So World Eaters, they got some substantial nerfs. So basically their favored enhancement, which is I get to reroll every turn, every time I use it. Every time, not every turn, because they can use it multiple times in a turn, got changed to once per game. So that's a big hit. I think Games Workshop, the reason behind a lot of these nerfs, they got points increases on the Exalted, the 8-bound, Karn went up in points. I believe they got these nerfs because, the army is a melee army that does not have, it's not like T-Suns or like Death Guard with like magic to like support its consistency in a lore-based scenario, obviously. But I think that Khorne is not the most consistent of gods, right? Like sometimes you just get bloodlust, right? You go crazy, you're not thinking straight, you're not making tactical decisions. And I honestly think the army was just too consistent, right? Like you were always getting advanced in charge or +2 movement. You always got whatever 2 because of all your rerolls and things, whatever 2 you wanted. So I think that needed to change, and I think Games Workshop did a good job there. Where are they going to sit? Probably low side of B now. I could be wrong. The scout move is still very strong, although I do believe that Space Marines are going to be at the top of that A tier, which we'll talk about next. And with that, you're going to get a lot of scouts, a lot of infiltrators, a lot of things like that where they can just throw like a 65-point scout unit away to block off any of your scout moves. And that's frustrating. GSC can do the same thing. That's also frustrating because they just can throw, 20-man that basically comes back on a 3+ on turn 1 against you. So they can basically throw a whole turn out. But yeah, I think they'll sit somewhere at, top of C, bottom of B. And that could change. Like I said, these are just my opinions. So next we got Space Marines. I think this rounds out the top of the A tier. I really think we're going to see like Space Marines, Orcs, Tau have a really good time right now. And Votan, right? Those are like those top 4. So why Space Marines, right? Well, Space Marines got almost no changes. Now, of course, the list that Lennon won with got some points increases, which are Centurions, Aggressors went up, Scouts went up, but very slightly. Like, the army didn't really lose that much. And Lennon was playing Vanguard, which meant he was not maxing on like Redemptors or the Gladiators or the Reapers or any of those things. So in a Ironstorm detachment, those guys gain a lot of real estate because basically they didn't get touched. Now the Redemptor, of course, went up a little bit, but really not a crazy amount. They're still one of the best pound per pound vehicles. They're at 210 now, so still very, very good. Tons of guns. Great in melee. Yeah, I mean, it's just a solid vehicle. So Space Marines definitely round out the top. You're going to see those a lot. And next week is the beginning, or this weekend, is the beginning of the balance update for a lot of tournaments. So some of the tournaments this week, most of the tournaments next week, right? Because it came out Tuesday. So I think that's the top 4 right there. And then, you got like 2 more that sit in the back. And, those guys can definitely do it with the right pilot. GSC probably sits somewhere in B tier. What happened to these guys? Nothing really. Like, Gene Stealers went down in GSC now. So I think the cost economy now of those guys is you can take 25 of them for the points cost that you could take 10 abominants. 10 aberrants, not abominants. 10 aberrants. So that still needs to be tested, but even one squad of them has infiltrate, and you get a redeploy now, and based on the new ruling, you can redeploy basically anywhere on the map in no man's land, which is great. So as long as your opponent doesn't have infiltrators, like, you can really play aggressive. Now, you never know who goes first, but if your opponent stacks like a particular corner or a particular side or their no man's land with something juicy, well, it's really nice to be able to redeploy those guys on a flank. And then if you get turn 1, great. If you don't get turn 1, well, you can hide them behind a wall. These guys have advance and charge, so real good, and they have devastating weapons. Now, they're not crazy, and they don't do what they used to do with like Might from Beyond, with like extra strength, extra attack, all that nice stuff. They don't do any of that stuff anymore. But, you know, the Broodlord added to them, it does add some significant value to them with giving them devastating weapons, which is nice. So you might see something like that. He's not super expensive either. He's like 75 points. So for like 150, I think you get like 5 of those guys with him, which is pretty nice. And then the rest of the army got some good buffs as far as, like I said, the redeploy and just not getting touched at all. Now, we lost the ability to fire satchel charges out of the truck, but if we're being honest with each other, it was probably just too expensive for what it did anyway. It's like a 110 point vehicle that usually just dies if it gets looked at the wrong way. So now instead of getting like tempted to take it, you just don't, right? So that's GSC. I think they're in a great spot. Definitely somewhere in B tier or the bottom of A tier. It's just going to depend on exactly what we see. I'm not going to put Dark Eldar anywhere because I just think that they need some time before I can gauge exactly. I'm not a Dark Eldar specialist. Some of my friends have been cooking up some nice builds. I think they work great in a team format. In a singles format, I think they suffer a little bit from like their detachment relies heavily on transports. So anything that can pop transports, Guard, Eldar, Space Marines from range, it's going to be a problem, right? They're just not going to be able to get their bonuses. And then ultimately, you're just running at somebody with like strength 4 weaponry, right? Like if you lose, I don't know, 4 transports on turn 1, and you have to walk across the table, that's not going to go well. And even when you get there, you're just punching with strength 4 weapons. Like the Lance is required, the +1 AP is required. So if you just don't have the ability to get there early on, it's going to be a problem. Now you still have Ravengers, but like, yeah. Again, they are pretty thin as far as armor protection, right? That's like a heavy tank from them. It's really not that crazy. So we'll see about them. T-Sun's got absolutely nothing. They're going to stay firmly in the middle of the B tier, which is basically where they were before. They might have moved up like 1 or 2 army slots, but definitely not to the A tier. They still have fundamental problems, which is like as long as melee armies are good, or armies that have a lot of trash, Votann, Orcs, and if Eldar continue to be up in that A tier, triple spinner, you're kind of forced to go into a build that you don't want to do, which is like lots of sorcerers, so you don't get targeted outside of 18, so you can't get teleported on. If Guard remain up there, same story. If World Eaters get good, right, they go to the A tier. People start playing them. They figure out the build. Then you've got Orcs, Votann, World Eaters, Eldar, and Guard. That's a lot of bad matchups. So, yeah, they're definitely going to go in the B tier, firmly somewhere in the B. For teams, they work great. They can definitely stomp down on some armies. Eldar is definitely one that does not like them at all, especially because that 18-inch untargetable for the whole army basically makes it really difficult for them to do a lot. So, yeah. Death Guard definitely took a hit. I honestly think, unfortunately, I think Death Guard moved down to like the bottom of B, maybe the top of C. So they're definitely in a rough spot. Now, they got some good points deductions, but they increase a lot of the things, right? Like Plague Burst Crawlers went up in points. Ouch. And Marines went up in points. Another ouch, right? You were taking 30 Marines. That hurts, right? So they went up 10 points for 5, 20 points for 10. So if you're taking 30, you went up basically 60 points. So 60 points there. Nurglings went up. So if you're taking 3 squads, you got 15 points there. You're already up to 75 points up. And then your Plague Burst Crawlers make it like almost 200 points. That's a lot, right? Now, the solace they can take from this is that, basically they got some good point decreases with Typhus, the Lord of Virulence, and the Death Shrouds. But I think one of the biggest hits, and I don't think a lot of people have realized it yet, is you physically can no longer take 3 Brigands in your list. It's not possible anymore. So that's a big deal, right? Like that is a massive deal because the army revolved around demons plus brigands. So Brigands going up basically points makes it like almost impossible for you now to take what you want to take, like, and that's really unfortunate because like I think a lot of people basically utilize triple brigand, but it just hits that line there where like you can't take it. It's 510, right? So 510 is too many points. You can only take 500 points with your allies. So 500 points with each one of the allies. So that's kind of an issue, right? So I'm very curious to see where we end up with that because, yeah, I mean, I don't know what they're going to do with Death Guard. I would imagine, like I said, they do take a hit. Now, some of their bad matchups got a little better, but again, if Eldar just moved to like straight up artillery fire, triple spinner, lots of infantry running around doing lots of damage and objective grabbing, not taking the avatar anymore. Yeah, Death Guard don't like that at all. So that's Death Guard. Talked about CSM, talked about T-Suns. Now let's talk about Demons. Demons, I think, fit somewhere in the B tier. Maybe bottom of A. Like, maybe bottom of A. The problem with Demons in general is that, yes, everything went down in points, basically. However, we have still no shooting. So transports are a problem, like the Orc meta, the Votan meta, World Eaters, CSM. If those things become still strong, those are a problem for Guard. Secondly, the units that you want to use, like stacking buffs is awesome. I have played a couple rounds with it. It's fantastic. However, it's tough to fit some of this stuff in here. It's tough to fit Crushers sometimes with the bubble. It's tough to fit Crushers in a spot where they work. And then sometimes charging gets a little wonky. And you could just fail charges. Like, I definitely failed a 5-inch charge the other day. And I like looked down at the dice, looked back up, and I was like, cool, nothing I can do, right? So that definitely happens. And when it does, it is real bad. So I think the big challenge with Demons is going to be perfect placement, perfect movement, and making all your charges, which is a lot of luck, right? There's just a lot of luck, and there's a lot of skill attached to that. So I think that a lot of people are going to find it fun. There's nothing more fun than putting like 5 damage letters on the table and basically slamming like a knight into oblivion with your letters. Like, that's hilarious. However, I think more oftentimes than not, people are going to find that like you just don't got the juice. And once they're on the table, things just die real quick, right? Like, you just have a 4-up save. It's a problem they've had for a very long time. They just don't have the juice sometimes. So that's where I think Demons are. Obviously, forgot about the big stompy boys in the house. We've got Chaos Knights. They got some points decreases on all the big knights, and they got some increases, which was the Brigands. Where do they sit? Roughly the same they were before. You've got to change the way that you take your allies. You can't take Changeling. You can't take Celeste. You can't take Blue Scribes anymore. Nurglings are still going to be good. Maybe a Beast of Nurgles, since you're already taking Nurglings, would be good for your backfield support. But ultimately, I think they play the same. You might be able to try one of the big knights for like the Lancer equivalent for basically like some really nice tank shock mortal wounds. But ultimately, the little knights just work the best, right? So now we go to Necrons. And I forgot, Necrons are the last of the A tier, top of the A's. These are the best. Right? Necrons got untouched. They obviously won LVO. There's a lot of different builds. Satans are definitely too cheap for what they do. The Monolith's fine, but Satans are definitely too cheap, and I think Wraiths are probably a little too cheap for what they do. So the thing about Necrons that makes them very strong is that there are multiple ways to play them, and that's just kind of a problem, right? Like, so with it being a problem, you can just get to a table and you can be playing against Canoptic with 18 Wraiths. Okay, my army wasn't built to do that. My army was built to kill like Monoliths, Hypercrypt nonsense, right? You get to the table, you can be playing against 5 Satans and Hypercrypt, right? And you're like, oh, I was dealing with Wraiths. I had stuff to handle Wraiths. So I think that's just going to be an issue. Now, don't get me wrong. I want the game to be fluid where people can take whatever they want. However, I don't want them to be oppressive. And half damage, 4-up, healing, feel no pain models at less than 300 points is oppressive, right? When you look at other models from other things, and I know you can't just straight up compare one army from another army, but the closest thing I can look at here would be like an Avatar, right? Their stats are mostly the same, right? They hit very hard. Now, the Nightbringer is actually really close to the Avatar, right? Because you've got really devastating shooting attack, and then you've got really devastating melee. They both have a 4-up invul. Now, obviously the Avatar has a 2+ save, which definitely should be taken into account. But, and the Avatar is 1 toughness better. He's toughness 12. But, yeah. These both have feel no pain, and they both have damage, and they both have a 4-up invul. Yeah. So him being like 265 is not really the same as an Avatar being 335 points. Like that stuff's like maybe he should be 50 points more than the Avatar, right? So like 285 for him. And then maybe the other guy should be closer, but him being the cheapest of these Satans is wild because he is one of the best, if not the best. Now, the Void Dragon definitely needs to go up in points, and so do the Transcendents. 275 isn't terrible for the Transcendents, but, like, they're still too cheap. Maybe 290. I don't want the army to be broke, but, like, you definitely need to increase some of these units. So that's where I sit with most of these armies. I think that was everybody. I don't think I missed out. Oh, Imperial Knights in the seas. They got some upgrades. All their stuff went down in points, but ultimately no Overwatch is going to just force that army to never be, like, truly, truly amazing. They'll definitely stat check some people. Like, you'll get to the table and you'll see, like, 3 big knights and, like, 4 little knights. And you're going to be like, I don't have enough firepower for this. So they definitely can beat down some armies. I'm just not sold on them winning GTs with that stuff unless, again, like, luck obviously is always a thing. So that's the breakdown of all the armies, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to be breaking down each one of the factions, covering a little of the list makeup in the future. Got plenty of videos coming out this year for you guys. I'm going to really ramp up the video content because you guys have been giving me some good feedback on this stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Thanks so much for watching. And until next time, guys, for the Dark Gods, I'll see you then.